hognose snake. And today we are thrilled to be joined by Peter Gross and Dr. Ray Wynn Grant, the co-hosts of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom Protecting the Wild. This TV series can be seen Saturday morning on NBC and showcases wildlife success stories across the United States. Peter and Dr. Ray have many accolades and experiences contributing to their expertise. I'm going to give a quick introduction to both speakers, but I really encourage everyone to check out their profiles in the Zoom events platform or the Summit program for their full biographies. Peter Gross is a veteran wildlife expert. As the co-host of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom Protecting the Wild, Peter Gross shares his love of wildlife and wilderness with audiences across the country. He joined the original Wild Kingdom team in 1985 and has nearly 30 years of field experience with captive wildlife, establishing breeding programs for endangered animals and rehabilitation programs for birds of prey. He's a USDA licensed exhibition exhibitor and animal educator and an active member of the American Zoos and Aquariums Association, the Association of Wildlife Educators, and the Zoological Association of America. Peter Gross is also on the board of directors of the Sassoon Marsh Natural History Association and a trustee for the Cheetah Conservation Fund. He is a frequent lecturer on conservation and preservation around the United States and Canada. As a wildlife ecologist, Dr. Ray Wynn Grant has expertise in uncovering how human activity influences carnivore behavior and ecology. As a native Californian, she attributes her interest in wildlife and conservation to the television shows she watched as a child, including the iconic original series Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. She's passionate about science communication and is the creator and host of the award-winning podcast Going Wild with Dr. Ray Wynn Grant, produced by PBS Nature. She is also a researcher at the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management at the University of California at Santa Barbara, and a research fellow with the National Geographic Society. So as I said, I'm so excited. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Peter Gross and Dr. Ray Wynn Grant.
Hi, David, Christy, and everyone. We're certainly pleased to be joining you. You're right. Ray and I are co-hosts proudly of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, and we look forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful introduction. We really appreciate it. We're happy to be here. I'm just looking at the numbers bump up. We're at 100 and over 160 people. And we really hope that you all have come with your questions, because there will be time for questions at the end of the presentation Peter and I will give. So we are going to share our screen. We have some slides prepared to talk about the television show that we work on and also talk about our own paths in conservation. So give me just one moment to share my screen with you all and share sound. All right, here we go. So it is absolutely our pleasure to be here as a part of the summit to talk in general about careers in the conservation space. But before we really get into the nitty-gritty of careers, I'm going to give you all some information about Wild Kingdom, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom Protecting the Wild, and what it's like working on this show and how well the show's doing.
That's right. And the original Wild Kingdom series debuted in 1963 and presented nature adventure genre, I should say, and blazed a trail for all natural history shows. And it has become sort of a template for so many shows that are sharing information with you all on television.
So it's been 61 years since Wild Kingdom first hit television, and our show, Protecting the Wild, we're just so proud. It is the #1 wildlife show on television right now, averaging 1.1 million viewers per week. So every episode, and people tune in on NBC. And maybe you're one of the people who watches it. And if so, thank you so much for the support. And if you need to catch up, you can watch every Saturday morning on NBC, wherever you live, also NBC.com. And if you're someone who streams your TV, you can stream this show on Peacock.
So we'd like to show you a quick trailer of season 2, which launches on Saturday, October 5th. Here it is.
Here we go.
Season 1 of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, Protecting the Wild, reignited the legacy of the beloved television series and earned 4 Emmy nominations.
It's just a thrill of a lifetime.
And reached an audience of over 1 million viewers each week. And now we're back with even more breathtaking adventures on Season 2. Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, Protecting the Wild.
It's a kitten!
With intense new challenges, international exploration,
That is so cool.
and animal encounters like you've never seen before.
Hi. We have 3 newborn cubs to this mama.
They're all getting along together.
Continue the legacy with Season 2 of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, Protecting the Wild. Season 1.
I see all those hearts and claps coming up. Thank you all for the
Yes.
applause.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, pretty great, huh? We're pretty awfully excited about the new shows. And yes, you're right. We do have the best jobs in the world.
Yeah, we really do. And one of the goals of the Wild Kingdom show, it's not just to take you around the world to places where there are wild animals, but it's to inspire the next generation to get involved in conservation. And one way we're doing this outside of the show is with the Wild Kingdom podcast.
That's right. We have 12 episodes featuring guests from our first series. And so far, we've had more than 225,000 downloads after 8 weeks. So we hope you'll tune in wherever you watch your podcasts. Listen to your podcast, I should say.
That's right. And so we're here in the spirit of National Wildlife Foundation. And as what you all heard in the introduction, Wild Kingdom has joined forces with NWF to provide grants to young people in high school and college, just like you, through the EcoLeaders program.
That's right. And Wild Kingdom has founded 7 grants to colleges and universities throughout the country that are actively involved with habitat and wildlife conservation. What a terrific start to a green career.
And so we really want to applaud all of you all who have been in this program. This is just an example of a couple here, but it's something that we're really proud of, and we're proud because of the incredibly hard work you all have done. Now, here's the part where we go a little off script, and Peter and I have an opportunity to talk about our twisty, turvy paths into careers in conservation. And I'll start if that's okay.
Please do.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll start. So I was born in San Francisco, California, to some pretty great parents. And something that's unique about my background, at least as it compares to a lot of my colleagues, is that as I was growing up in my family and my community, we weren't outdoorsy folks. So I didn't grow up, visiting national parks with my family or even state parks. And we didn't go hiking and certainly not camping. And I was actually admitting to somebody recently that I was a Girl Scout growing up, but I was like an inner city Girl Scout. So we did just urban things and never really got out into nature. And despite that, I loved the natural world. I loved wild animals. And I was able to fall in love with nature and with wild animals through watching television. So I was allowed to sit down and watch as many nature shows as I wanted to. Interestingly enough, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom was one of those amazing shows that I just ate up and tried to watch as many as I could. And I was transported around the world. And this was good and also confusing. It was great because I was inspired. I knew what I wanted to do. As a kid, I used to say to my family and my teachers, I want to be a nature show host when I grow up, because those were the only people that I was aware of who traveled and who interacted with wild animals. I should say traveled to the wilderness and interacted with wild animals. I knew one type of person, and it was a nature show host. And so I was very inspired. But where this was a little bit confusing for me, again, as a young person without access to nature, was that I was under the impression that nature and the wilderness was in Africa and Asia and South America and Australia and anywhere but where I was from. And that was because most nature shows that I watched, especially at that time, took us across oceans and across continents to see magical international wildlife. And I didn't have a sense that North America was rich in wilderness and wild animals that needed protection. So I had a pretty, I would say, standard upbringing. I stayed an urbanite through to college. I left home to go to college in Atlanta, so another big urban center, and I was super excited about that. And I majored in environmental science when I got to college. I realized I think this is the closest thing to what wildlife hosts do, so I'll choose this as a major. And it wasn't a hit right away. It didn't take me long to realize that studying forests and insects and water systems from a PowerPoint presentation or from a textbook wasn't exactly the best way to get that education. And the people in my classes that I was surrounded by were environmental science majors because they had spent tons of time out in nature, and that's how they loved it. So as a 20-year-old college student in an urban place who had never really had a meaningful experience in the outdoors, I decided to challenge myself. And I found a study abroad program that was offered, that my school was in partnership with, that was a wildlife management study abroad program. I will also note that it was inexpensive. I was on a scholarship to college, and so any extras that I did had to fit within that same kind of scholarship tuition level that I had. And this program took us to southern Kenya. And before I knew it, I was shopping at the thrift store with my mom and getting used hiking boots and backpacks and sleeping bags. Yes, even a used sleeping bag. I would not do that these days. And jetted off to the southern part of Kenya and spent an entire semester learning wildlife conservation, ecology, and management from Black Kenyan professors who had grown up in Kenya, left for Europe or the United States to get their PhDs, and then returned to teach about their natural resources. And it was super transformative for me. And what I learned about myself is that I really needed someone to take me outside. I didn't have the connections or the community or really the confidence to do it on my own. I needed to be guided into the outdoors and really supported through that. And it was a game changer for me. So spending that semester learning about wild animals in the field really solidified for me that whether or not I ever became a nature show host, working with wild animals and on conservation was exactly for me. The next part of my career journey sounds linear, and it would take hours for me to describe how topsy-turvy it actually was. But essentially, I graduated college with a degree in environmental science, got my first job at the World Wildlife Fund at their headquarters in Washington, D.C., as a secretary. So I was an environmental scientist, I had done field work, but the only thing I was eligible or qualified for in this big nonprofit was to be an administrative assistant, which is extremely dignified work. So I don't mean to say that it is something that people shouldn't be proud of. It was a wonderful job for me and for all the other administrative assistants that were there. But it wasn't science and it wasn't working with wildlife, which is what I aspired to. And being at World Wildlife Fund was great because I wanted to match the people that I saw at work every day. Every day I would be in meetings taking notes and making Xerox copies back when that was a thing for the scientists who are coming back from the field, from Congo studying gorillas or from India studying tigers. And I really wanted what they had. And I looked at myself and I said, what's the difference between me and them? And it was graduate school. And so I signed up for graduate school. I signed up for a master's program and really enjoyed that program. So much so that I went straight into a PhD program. So in both of those graduate programs, I was studying African lions in central Tanzania, and then switched over to North American bears, very hands-on, and a really profound time in terms of the mentorship that I was granted and the skills that I gained. It was in my PhD program that I really got started doing public speaking, and my entry into conservation media was through public speaking, just talking about my project and talking about bears and talking about how to be safe around bears became something bigger than I imagined. And I realized that I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed talking to people. I went to graduate school in New York City, not a lot of bears there. So I was able to really bring people verbally into the field with me, describe what it was like and talk about the adventures. And that became something that I wanted to do more and more. And from there, I developed, a little bit of social media skills and, some podcasting skills, and it has built to who I am today, which is both a scientist and a science communicator. And it goes without saying, but I will say it anyway, that I never expected to be the co-host of one of those shows that inspired me as a kid. It is an absolutely surreal, totally full circle experience that I'm having. I still pinch myself every day. And the way that it happened is because the leadership behind Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom decided that they wanted to bring it back, and in a way that was really rooted in science and conservation. And they gave me a shot at it. So again, I hope you all are writing down your questions, because my turn is all finished. I'm going to pass it over to my co-host, Peter Gross, who has had a long and diverse and fascinating career in conservation that is super different than mine. So you'll get a different perspective.
It is super different, which makes us such a unique pair of co-hosts. We cover all spectrums of science and animal behavior. And I was sort of hardwired, born into a small town in New York in the Hudson Valley, surrounded by forest, that my grandfather was a forester, and he forested the entire area. And that was sort of my backyard playground. So that I was hardwired to end up in this field. He was also quite a well-known wildlife artist. So I spent a brief stint at Silvermine College studying wildlife art. And then quickly I learned I didn't like the word that went along with artists, which was starving. So from that point, I spent a brief time in the military, and then upon getting out, knew exactly what I wanted to do, and went to school for wildlife husbandry and behavior. Upon graduating from there, I started to work for a company called Resorts that had a park division, and they were breeding endangered species and were wanting to enlarge that end of the zoo, the park, and the conservation center. With so much help from people from AZA, UC Davis, veterinarians, Moorpark College, I sort of groomed my education and morphed into that position by, frankly, being the first one there in the morning at work and the last one to leave, because I knew this is exactly what I wanted to do. I was fortunate to be given a budget to design free roaming animal displays at one of our facilities. And the idea was I turned herds of animals loose on islands, as well as lions and tigers and other rare and endangered animals, and caged the people in 40-person Colorado river rafts. Well, that worked really well. And as a result, the species started reproducing rather quickly. One group of endangered tigers had a large litter. They usually have 2 to 3, and there were 7. The mother, whom I had to hand raise 4.5 years prior to that, let me crawl in the den box so I could rotate the cubs so that they could all get the necessary colostrum. And a picture was taken, and the picture went on the wire. That's right, this was pre-internet. And I had a call from the conservation end of the Johnny Carson show. Jim Fowler was a regular guest there. And I was there, and it went well. At the end of the show, Mr. Fowler approached me and said that Mr. Perkins is thinking about retiring. They didn't want an actor, they wanted some conservation experience. Would I be interested? And I said, well, let me think, yes. So that was the beginning of a long career of having Jim mentor me, continue my work with free roaming animal display and design. And up until now, where Ray and I are out making new Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom shows, protecting the wild. So I think it's time for you to ask us some questions, don't you?
Almost.
Okay.
We were asked to share some tips with y'all about what you should consider when you're pursuing a career in conservation, and then to really emphasize how diverse of a space the conservation world is. So we both have some tips, and hopefully they'll come back up in the Q&A. But one of the things that I really try to emphasize for students especially is to not worry too much about the pay. And I think we all are on the same page that very few people are getting rich dedicating their lives to conservation. It's not a super high paying gig. But what I do try to emphasize for folks is that it does pay enough. And there's something really important about knowing that a career will have jobs that pay enough. So you might not be buying a yacht like you would if you were in a more environmentally destructive field, but you also will be able to afford the lifestyle that that you need, and it is always increasing and getting better and really matching people's needs. So that's something that I get asked a lot. So I just kind of wanted to preemptively say, I have been at every level. Well, not every level. I haven't been CEO of a conservation organization yet, but I've been at many of the entry level places in environmental nonprofits and conservation organizations. And they don't pay a lot yet, but they do pay enough. Enough to feel well, enough to support family members, enough to really grow and thrive and do good work. One of the other things that came to mind that I think, Peter, you would agree with, is that getting your foot in the door really does matter. I learned this when I graduated from college with a really hard-earned environmental science degree, and I was ready to be a researcher, to do science, to be a field biologist. And the job that I got, and it was hard to get, was as an administrative assistant, like, you know, filing people's expense reports and taking their receipts and making a lot of coffee for folks and calling restaurants to get catering for meetings. That was my job. It was extremely unscientific. But having a place and a role to show up every day in one of the, you know, top environmental nonprofits in the world exposed me to so much. I mean, just sitting at my desk every day, I would just hear the conversations that were being had. I could enter myself into any meeting I wanted to just to sit and take notes. I had access to some of my heroes, and I was able to ask them questions. And I was also able to say and put on my resume that I worked at this big environmental nonprofit because I was really there. And I really believe my career path would have been wildly different had I said no to that administrative assistant job at the big environmental organization. It wasn't the position that was right for me, it was the organization that was right for me. And I got my foot in the door, and it helped a lot. So that's something that's my tip. And then my last tip, I'll pass it over to Peter after this, is that it's important to be vocal about your mentorship needs. I didn't do this early enough. I had sat as an administrative assistant for about a year, just hoping that someone would look at me and say, I bet you want to be a scientist, don't you? I really wanted people to read my mind. And instead, I realized that most people assume that if you're not speaking up, if you're not that squeaky wheel, then you're really satisfied and content and you don't have needs. So what I should have done, and what I'd encourage all of you all to do, is wherever you are, whether you're in high school or at college or in an entry-level position, to really make sure someone is aware of what your goals are. And that person can help you find some sort of mentorship. You know, people will pull you into a little chit chat or maybe invite you to attend a conference that'll expose you to a lot of networking opportunities. But if you don't speak up, people will obviously assume that you're really content staying where you are. What do you think?
Well, I can tell you were very shy about that. So you seem to have gotten over that problem, and I'm glad you speak up when you do. But very good point you brought up there. It is a real catch-22 when people are looking for their first job, is the question is always, what experience do you have? And you have to figure out a way to get some experience because people aren't willing to take the risk in most cases. So if you need to do an internship, volunteer at a nature, a science center, a zoo, a rehabilitation center, whatever it takes to get that first bit of experience on your resume will make so much difference. I do think that people are getting more used to knowing that people don't work for free. They do have to be able to support themselves while they're working. So I think a stipend of some sort should be part of the question when you're trying to get your foot in the door. The other thing I think is just, as I said earlier, be the one who works a little harder than the other people there, make yourself known. And then there's perception about jobs. I remember when we had people who wanted to be veterinary technicians, say a 2-year program versus the going to UC Davis or Cornell to become a veterinarian to get a feel of what that was like, is that interview professionals you know that are in that field and be sure that your perception of the job is the reality of what the job really takes. So those would be some of my tips for my advice.
And we could go on, but we also want to give some examples of folks we've met through filming our show who are super involved in wildlife conservation, but are not necessarily traditional scientists. So they're not necessarily the folks you see in the field, hands-on with wild animals, like even in some of these pictures, but they play a tremendous role in wildlife conservation. And perhaps some of these examples might fit some of the skills you all already have. So I'll just rattle off a few. We met a woman named Sue. We call her Seabird Sue, and she's a visual artist. And so she worked in a wood shop and she created these wooden decoys of puffins, an endangered species of puffin, and then would paint them and would do these beautiful elaborate paintings that would match what puffins look like. And they were actually placed on some of the rocks where puffins lay their eggs. And real puffins from a distance would think that that was one of their own, and it would attract them to safe habitat for puffins. And her background is in visual art, and she paints every day. And without her, we might not have Atlantic puffins today. There's also, we just got back from the subarctic, and we were at the Churchill Northern Study Center, where we met a woman named Kate Branson, who runs a garden, but it's a hydroponic garden. So it's in kind of a trailer and it doesn't use any soil. So just water, recycled water, and then the roots of these plants. And it feeds the entire community of Churchill with fresh vegetables and fresh fruit in a place, I mean, we're talking about the Arctic, where that doesn't typically grow. It uses minimal water. Again, it's recycled, no soil, so we don't have waste. It's extremely productive and low energy use. And by doing that, it allows the area to maintain wilderness for wild animals like polar bears. So if they were doing a bunch of agriculture up there, instead of managing this garden, actually polar bears would be more threatened. Another example is a personal friend of mine. Her name is Jenny Adler. And although she has a PhD in biology, she's a journalist. And she really switched to doing underwater photography. And she's one of the few divers that is able to dive into caves and take pictures and video with camera. So she is super in demand. She travels all over the world. She dives in all kinds of water, and she tells stories from under the ocean. And then I had a fun adventure with Peter a couple of weeks ago at the San Diego Zoo, and I was making bread. And I was working with a nutritionist, someone trained in animal nutrition. And we were making a special panda bread for the brand new giant pandas that had just arrived from China. And although her background wasn't in field biology, it was in, vitamins and minerals and fats and carbohydrates and understanding those dynamics so that we can keep pandas healthy. And that was a really eye-opening experience for me.
So it's true. There are just a multitude of jobs that relate to conservation. Just a couple that come to mind. There was a pilot who flew a plane to conduct an aerial survey on right whales off the East Coast. I've always been interested in whale populations, how they're doing, and was the first to be invited to go along to look at whales and count them out of a low-flying plane. What I wasn't aware of, to be allowed to fly in this low-flying plane, you had to go through a course called ditching, where you put in a simulated airplane all rolled upside down, thrust into the water, you push the window out, swim to the surface following the bubbles. There, now you're qualified to go in this small plane and do a whale count. So that was pretty exciting. Carlos Guiana was a wedding photographer, and during COVID, business stopped, people couldn't get together. So he started filming wildlife off the coast of Malibu, and he started specializing in sharks. He was amazed to see just how often swimmers and surfers and kayakers have sharks around them, not aggressively, just curiously. And so he turned that into a business that has now become one of the world-renowned shark photographers. As a matter of fact, he directed Ray and I out off of Santa Barbara with a radio, with a drone, so we could paddle very close to a white shark who came over and was curious about us, which is interesting if you think you're in a 14-foot kayak and the white shark was a little over 8 feet. So this drone photography is really become so helpful. You don't rent helicopters anymore when you film wildlife. You have a quiet drone that films them from a distance and zooms in, and you capture them doing natural behavior. The horticulturists at San Diego Zoo, we did get to see the pandas just arrived in August. I was able to participate in their diet, which is cutting bamboo. But there's not just one type of bamboo. They have several different types that they eat. Some have a higher sugar content, some don't, so they vary the diet. And what we had cut in the morning was cleaned and washed and presented, and then we got to watch the pandas consume it. So there were so many jobs related to just seeing those pandas get fed. The keepers, the feeders, the cleaners, the trimmers, and then the actual panda care specialists themselves who presented it to them. So anyway, I could ramble on all day, but I think it might be time for us to move on.
And now finally, we're able to stop sharing our screen and you can see us a little bit better. And I believe David and Christy are going to help us moderate some questions because we'd love to see how we can help you all.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that presentation. I feel like myself, I could take up the rest of the time, but I'm not going to. But I just wanted to say I really appreciate both of you sharing your advice about first-time jobs or internships and being open to opportunities. And especially if you don't think it's directly related to wildlife or conservation, I think that's so important. And also spotlighting all of these different people that you've met over the years that have jobs that are supporting conservation, but maybe don't have a science background. I think I'm not sure I've ever heard a presentation put together just like that. So that was really interesting. So thank you. We have a ton of questions that have come in, almost 30 questions. So I don't know that we're going to get to all of them, but I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to do my best to get through as many as we can. All right. And David, thank you for helping me organize these. All right. So we've had several folks asking similar questions. So the first is, how do people get into wildlife conservation and rehab careers?
Okay. Well, we can both take this one, but I'll start.
Please, yeah.
There is no one way. My gosh, if there was one way, then I think it would be either Peter or me here on the screen and not both of us, because we represent two totally different ways of getting into this field. And the thing we have in common that I think is the case with everyone I know who works in conservation is somehow being inspired. So there's got to be some kind of spark. Everyone's spark might be different. and the inspiration people get to join this field might be different. But everyone I know, wouldn't you say, has a story of being inspired to do this work. For some people, their inspiration comes from tragedy. Maybe they saw a forest being cut down, in order to build a mall, or maybe they, knew about an endangered species that they cared very much about, and they wanted to, make sure that doesn't happen to other species. And then some people gather inspiration from beautiful moments, from a beautiful walk in nature, or, again, I'll use myself as an example. Wonderful teachers on a study abroad program when I was 20 years old who empowered me and said, look, I know you've never been outside. I know you've never put on hiking boots. I know you've never seen a wild animal, but we'll hold your hand as we go through that so that you can put down the anxiety and really just absorb everything in the moment. So there isn't a one way, but I think once you get that spark, and once you really know that the career path is for you, you might be a tiny kid, or you might be a young adult, or anywhere in between, then you're going to figure out, well, what part of conservation do I want to work in?
Exactly. And I might just reiterate by saying that what you have locally near you, a nature center, a science center, rehabilitation center, a zoo, or any form of wildlife club, make contacts, network with those people, interview them, talk about them. People love to talk about themselves and their career. It seems to have to do with nature or wildlife, because our experience is they're passionate about what they're doing. And we all need to participate in helping and saving what we have. We're here at the American Zoo Association conference, and there are an awful lot of people here that are just networking, talking to people about how did you get where you are? How did you first get your foot in the door? So I would say go to online conferences, and if there's some nearby, visit those as well.
Great. Yeah, we've had a lot of questions about a lot of the content that you've already addressed, but really just how do you get in the door? How do you get connected? What are the chances and that you need to take and explore? So that's great.
Can I then add to that, just because again, I'm reminded that we do have some high school students in the audience with us. And I know that there's like a lot of anxiety. So if any of you are like me, I went to a very large, maybe underserved public high school, and there were not environmental classes. And so I don't want anyone out there to think that you're missing something. If you're not like taking the environmental science class at school, then somehow you're missing the boat. It's not being hidden from you. There's no special club that everyone's in that you just didn't get the memo about. Everyone's not hanging out without you. Entry-level opportunities for environmental or conservation professions aren't everywhere. And so if you are worried that you're somehow not aware of what your school or community has, it's very likely that your school or community doesn't have it. Mine never did. So again, it was talking to professors when I got to college and saying, help, how? Like, I really need to be guided through this. And that's what helped me understand the steps. So for many of you, I hope you don't have to figure this out on your own. Remember that if you are privileged enough to be in college, that college professors get paid to help students do well and get far. And then the internet is a really great place to start. And watching our TV show is an even better place to start, because that's not just self-promotion. But we really have a unique program here where we gave some examples, but we highlight lots of different people and lots of different parts of the world, let alone parts of this country, who have really interesting and diverse jobs in conservation. Folks who are senior citizens and folks who are, children sometimes, and everywhere in between.
Great. All right. One of the next questions I think I'll ask, this is from the chat, was from what I can see online, this isn't the only work you do as co-hosts of Protecting the Wild. Could you both take us through a week in the life of a multitasking scientist?
Whoa.
I don't think we have time.
Don't get it too tired.
Let's see, maybe a recent week. Let's see, we were at the aquarium in Georgia, and you were diving with whale sharks and learning about whale sharks there, as well as other marine life that was sharing the tank. And then, let's see, I went to Mexico to dive with them in the wild, work with researchers to see how ecotourism was affecting them. Prior to that, we went to Hudson Bay in the southern Arctic to kayak around with beluga whales and spent time there. And then we weren't doing that early in the morning. We'd be out filming polar bears with long lenses, and they still had their thick winter coats on, and there had been a long ice period, so they were fat and healthy and laying there, in some cases nursing their offspring. And then between shoots, let's see, we're doing voiceovers for a show that we had completed before that. And then where did we go directly after that? We went to
There's so many places.
we had some podcasts to do. That's right. We did a few podcasts together, which is interesting, coordinating the guests and our schedule at the same time. And then we had a planning meeting about the up and coming shows for the next season. And I'm sure I'm forgetting something.
Oh, there's a lot. So I mean, Peter nailed it. We're really busy. And I will say that hosting Wild Kingdom could easily be a full-time job, right? So it could definitely be, and maybe it should be, the only work that I do. But it's true that at the moment I'm involved in several other things, and so is Peter. And part of it is research. Part of it for me are a couple of other storytelling or science communication projects. I will say I had a book come out this year, so I spent years writing a book and trying to squeeze that into my spare time.
What is it called?
It's called Wild Life.
Oh, that's right.
Which is 2 words, not one. And it's my memoir. So if any of you are interested in the fullness of my story and my non-traditional journey, my book Wild Life is available. You can get it on Amazon or at your bookstore, or listen to it on Kindle. So Peter and I, one thing we didn't talk about is that Peter and I both do public speaking, and some of that public speaking is through Wild Kingdom, where people will write up to the Wild Kingdom folks and say, we want your hosts to give a talk. And sometimes outside of that, we get people to say like, oh, we're doing a conservation conference or a summit or something, and we'd love you all to come and speak. So public speaking is one of our jobs. Podcasting for Wild Kingdom, I host my own podcast on PBS. I don't want to put Peter on the spot too much, but there's some writing that he is doing also about his personal story. So books, interviews, media interviews.
Yeah.
Peter has been doing this for years, so I'll actually have him jump in about all the ways that he shows up on TV, not just for Wild Kingdom.
It's true. Media interviews are an important part of what we do. It gives us a large platform to talk about conservation issues and affect the public attitude about conservation. Also, I thoroughly enjoy public speaking at performing arts centers or universities. And then at the end, I think the most fun part for me is the question and answers. People's perception about the state of the planet. Sadly, what you hear an awful lot was sort of gloom and doom for years, and you hear about the problems we have, and yes, we do have some, but you don't hear as much said about the solutions we've had, the number of species coming off the endangered species, the reasons for hope. I think that if anybody has a reason not to have hope, considering Jane Goodall's book is called Reasons for Hope. And she says, basically, we will solve the problems we have. It's humans will do that. So as well as pointing out global warming issues and ozone issues and problems that we have, we also need to point out that we had very serious problems in the past. And our track record shows we do solve them. So with that, we hope to connect with the next generation, get them involved, and not have anybody think that, oh, it's just too late, because it certainly is not. We keep solving problems of species that almost disappeared or on the brink, and now some of them are actually off the endangered species list. So I think the message of hope is very important.
So thank you for that question. I hope we didn't stress anyone out by letting you know exactly how busy we are. A week in the life is lately has been really intense and lots of travel, and especially for me, lots of different back and forth between presenting and engaging in science research. But one way to do this work is to do one job at a time instead of like me and Peter, where you have 5 or 6 jobs at one time. Doing one job at a time is a lovely way to be involved in conservation, and I think it's more normal too.
I don't
Great.
know. Normal could be
The
boring.
normal might be boring.
Yeah. All right. So, well, I also want to thank you for mentioning the focus on the positive, focus on the solutions, because there is a lot of sadness and doom and gloom, and that is hard to see, and folks can shut down, and we don't want that. We don't need that. So it's important to highlight that the solutions are working. There's positive and there's hope. So I'm glad you highlighted that. All right. So we have, so the next question. So this question came in early, and this is specific for you, Dr. Wynn-Grant. Firstly, I have seen you all over the media. This is the question. First, I've seen you all over the media with your amazing work and expertise being applied to movies like Cocaine Bear and collaborating with the likes of John Legend and beyond. What would you advise to a young Black person attempting to trailblaze their own path in the zoological academic world, specifically in research?
Oh, thank you for this question. And thank you for noticing me in the spaces that I do show up. This is where some of my imposter syndrome comes in, because a lot of the times when I get asked questions specific about, what's advice for a young Black person coming into this career, I feel like I still need that advice. I'm like, someone give me advice. I'm a mid-career Black person who's still trying to figure it out and is often just kind of trying to navigate in the dark, because this work has not been done before by many people like us. And so the advice that I wish I had when I was in high school or college is a bit non-traditional, but it's to really make sure that your mental health is taken care of. Stress, whether it's stress from school or stress from work or stress from society, or stress from family or wherever your stressors come from, it can really take a huge toll on you. And living as a Black person in America who's young, who's ambitious, who has dreams, you can kind of get beat up along the way, by society, by racism, by, even just like looking at, some of the unfortunate events that happen, in the news that you see, and making sure that you have a good practice for your mental health is going to take you so far, because grief is going to be a part of, and it's not particular to conservation, it's any path you choose. Being Black in America is a struggle. It's a very particular, very distinct history and current reality, and making sure that you have your community, whether that's family or friends who become family, making sure you have your confidants, making sure that you have your practice for how to feel well. Gosh, that's my biggest piece of advice, because, and this is for Black folks, this is for brown folks, immigrant folks, people from the LGBTIQ community, people with disabilities, I mean, you name it, people from any target group, lots of kinds of women. It's really hard to figure out, well, what kind of conservationist do I want to be when maybe your rights are being discussed, in the national stage, or your parents are really afraid about whether they might get deported. There's so many social issues that impact some of us and not all of us, and also impact our ability to perform well in our conservation jobs. So I have to say, like, the day that I found, therapy, mindfulness, meditation, the day that I realized that my college had a student health center that also offered mental health resources, that was a game-changing day for me. And I'm also fortunate that every single one of my girlfriends, and we're all like Black millennials and in various jobs, whether it's law or business or politics, we all make sure that our mental health comes first, and that our careers come second, because that's the way to not just survive, but to really thrive. And yeah, so that's my advice. So really non-traditional and not professional advice, but you got to take care of your head.
Thank you. All right, so I think we have time for one more question, but I think we have to keep it short. But we have so many questions, so I want to take the time we have. So the next and last question is, what has the most challenging part of your career been, and how did you get past it?
You have to go first.
Well, I think I don't want to tell it the most challenging. I probably think I will say the most important part of the career is to stay current, be open-minded, read as much as you can about changes with whom you'll be working, as well as the environment where you'll be working. Be flexible, be part of your career. Things are going to change, pivot. If you need to learn to new skills to adapt to your job, do it. Jump in the deep end of the pool and do it. But stay focused. The mentors that I had, Marlon Perkins was 88 when he was still in this position. Jim Fowler was in his 80s. I'd say mental health is important, but physical health is very important. You need to, if you eat well and you exercise and stay healthy and stay sharp and keep your mind busy, 60 is the new 40. I ran into people backpacking and camping, climbing mountains in their 80s sometimes. I had a skier go by me, and I caught up with him to talk to him before we got in line, and he was just about to turn 90. It's incredible now. We live in a time where age is a number. It's your lifestyle and your health that matters so much. So you may think you're halfway through your career. I think you're a third of the way through your career, because I think I'm halfway through my career.
There you go.
So I would say those are important things.
Yeah, and I bet Peter and I could do a whole session on what have been some of the hardest things and how we've gotten through them. So I'm going to choose one. But one thing that a lot of people don't know is that I received a whole lot of rejection from nature shows before I got one. So the hardest part of my career was realizing that I would never host a nature show. And this was about 3 years ago, after spending, 15 or so years pitching myself and hiring agents and networking my way into executive meetings and making presentations and saying, hi, I'm this wildlife scientist and I know all these things and I love to talk and I'm daring and going on adventures, and having network executives say like, wow, you are the real deal. That's pretty amazing, the stuff you do. Yeah, you'd be perfect for TV, but you don't fit exactly what we're looking for in terms of what a host looks like. And at a certain point, I realized oh, you know what? It's not me. There isn't more I can do. I've already worked with wildlife around the world. I've gotten every degree that it's possible to get. There isn't more I can do. Society actually has to change, or some executive at some company has to decide that they would like me to host their show. So there was a period, again, just less than 3 years ago, where I put it down, where I said, you know what, I really love my life. I'm working with wild animals, I'm researching them, I'm working with students, I'm writing books and podcasting and, doing real conservation work. And I love this. And I wanted to host a nature show, but this is okay too. And it's not going to happen.
Well, from my perspective, it turns out your timing is perfect.
I put it all the way down. And, one of the things I think I want everyone on this webinar to know is that I didn't get myself this job. Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom decided to bring someone like me on to co-host the show. So I say this to kind of bring a lesson about rejection. Sometimes when we do get rejected from things that we think are our calling or are our goals, happened to me a zillion times, 1 zillion. It's not necessarily personal to who we are, or it's not necessarily always about exactly their resume. There are business decisions that are often being made. Some of them are, sexist or racist or classist or whatever. But so many things are being done at a corporate level or business level that we can't see that aren't necessarily about us. And one reason that I feel so grateful to Wild Kingdom is that, unbeknownst to me, in some boardroom or in some, conference table, my name was brought up in a meeting and folks discussed whether I would be a good host. And it had nothing to do with, what I wanted. I didn't send in an application. It trickled down that way. And sometimes some of the greatest blessings of your life, whether in conservation or beyond, are going to be a bit out of your control. I mean, Peter has a similar story. He did not necessarily go looking for a job on TV with wild animals. He met a person who said, would you like a job on TV,
Yeah.
working with wild animals? And so, again, please understand that sometimes your rejections, even in the conservation space, are actually going to be guiding you towards something that's exactly right for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for both responding to that question. And that's super important to highlight, because we all experience rejection, and you just have to get through it, deal with it, and move on. So we are at the end of our time. We had so many questions. I wish we had more time, but we don't. Peter and Dr. Ray, thank you so much for your time and your energy and sharing all of this great information and advice and your experiences. So thank you so much. And for our participants, we are going to close this part of the summit right now. The next session will be starting in a few moments. So I'm going to ask you to exit this session. You will go back to the Zoom lobby to join the next session. And the next session is Many Paths to Conservation Careers. So thank you so much, everyone.